You are listening to Aim Higher, a Catholic podcast designed to instruct and to encourage the daily practice of our faith.
Okay. Pax et bonum, peace and good to you all. Welcome to another episode of Aim Higher. Today we're going to kick off, I say a lot, by the way, I noticed that. Today we're going to kick off a series that my plan is we'll try to accomplish once a month, going over the different virtues of the month. What prompted this episode or the series is there's a book that I came across many years ago before I came to New York, and it's called A Year with the Saints. And it discusses a different virtue for every month of the year. I found it quite beneficial, and I probably learned the impact of it when I came here, as it guided me, or was one of the guides to the religious life. I highly recommend this book. I do believe Tan has republished it. If you want to know more about this book, don't hesitate to contact me, and I will do my best to accommodate you. With that said, I am not doing this episode by myself, so you can all be relieved as much as you want. This is what we're going to consider a bonus episode, because joining me today is His Excellency, Most Reverend Giles Butler. Hello, Your Excellency.
Hello, sister.
A man who does not need an introduction, except for the fact that people probably didn't know you were there until I said something. Anyway, so for the month of January, the virtue is perfection. So I thought I would start by one of the quotes in the book. And that's what's beautiful about this book, is that there are many quotes from the different saints, and then they expound on it. But rather than just strictly read from the book, which also this book is an audiobook. You can find it online as well. I thought it would be beneficial to have a dialogue and get some pointers, if you will, from His Excellency. So to begin, perfection consists in one thing alone, which is doing the will of God. For according to our Lord's words, it suffices for perfection to deny self, to take up the cross, and to follow him. Now, who denies himself and takes up his cross and follows Christ better than he who seeks not to do his own will, but always that of God? Behold now how little is needed to become a saint. Nothing more than to acquire the habit of willing on every occasion what God wills. St. Vincent de Paul.
Very good. And I can't help but think of perfection, and many people will. I did make a recording some time ago on perfection, and I was called out that only God is perfect. Mm-hmm. And I reminded in a text to this individual that, yes, only God is perfect, but he calls upon us to be perfect. Our Lord said, be ye perfect because your Father in heaven is perfect. And we are God's perfect creation. God doesn't do anything imperfectly. All that God has done is good. It is perfect in its kind. And I think in the world, especially the world I see today, I was happening to look over through the news feed this morning, and all these things come up on my feed. I realize it's a Google algorithm.
Yes. Although I think your Google algorithm is a little weird.
So many of these things come up with the idea of the transsexual movement, and when I see these things, I think they're insulting God, as if God made a mistake, that somehow he got it wrong. And I think really this quote that you just read of St. Francis de Sales.
Or St. Vincent de Paul. I'm sorry, I found another quote that I'll probably read later.
Yes,
Sorry.
So St. Vincent de Paul is very beautiful. It is denying ourselves and seeking to do God's will in everything. And I can think of no better place to start than really with that idea that, yes, many people are confused about their sexuality, gender, whatever it is, which I think a lot of it is socially induced. But there's no doubt that adolescents go through a trying period when they're trying to discover who they are, what their purpose in life is, what they're supposed to do. And I think really the answer is, what does God want us to do? I recall even as a young man being frustrated when so many people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? And I don't know. I'm interested in everything. Everything is attractive to me. I want to do this. I want to do that. But I'm reasonable enough to know that I can't do everything.
Or at least not everything well.
Yes. Was it the jack of all trades, but a master of none? And it's not that we have to be a master of anything, but we need to put our heart and soul into something, to focus our attention to the best of our ability in whatever it is we're doing. So I think really the answer to the question of the youth, what should you do or what do you want to do? The answer should be, what does God want me to do? And then it becomes very easy biologically. God gave me a male body or God gave me a female body. I want to be what God made me to be. And this is where I will find my fulfillment. I will find my happiness. And just accepting the fact that God knows what he's doing. And yes, in the genders, there is a wide spectrum. There are masculine women, there are tomboys, there are feminine men or more delicate men, if you will, more sensitive men. But all that fits into the range of either masculinity or femininity. It doesn't mean that you're in the wrong body. There is a wide range of femininity and a wide range of masculinity. So we can look at that and begin to say, okay, this is obvious. God made me a man, I must be a man. Or God made me a woman, I must be a woman. All right, that seems basic and fundamental, but it seems our society has forgotten that and lost that idea. But to be the perfect man, to be the perfect woman now, how do I go about doing that? All right. And it's not something biological, but it is something within me. And as your quote there from St. Vincent de Paul says very beautifully, it is in doing God's will. So constantly throughout our lives, throughout our day, asking, what does God want me to do? And very often we know the answer simply by the circumstances. Where do we find ourselves? What is our condition of health? We look at religious vocations. How do I know I have a religious vocation? What are the requirements for a religious vocation? And when you really boil it all down to it, you just need normal health, normal intelligence. You have to have the physical capabilities to endure this station in life. And if you don't have the physical ability to live that life, then God hasn't called you to that life. You need to look elsewhere. There is another vocation for you. So the first question we ask is, do you have these gifts? And these are not things that you develop yourself, but these are gifts given to you by God. And God is calling upon you to perfect them in this life or in another, I shouldn't say this life, this vocation or that vocation. And we need to ask ourselves, what does God want me to do? And then pursue that. How do I make this happen? How do I live this life that God is calling me to live? And God will not, generally, he will not show you everything all at once. He takes you by the hand, step by step, and he first leads you to do this. And if you accomplish this, then he holds out the next goal, the next step. If we look at the path to heaven in the broad perspective, it is impossible. There's no way for us to get to heaven because we're going to lean on our own efforts, our own endeavors, and we are going to constantly fail. So we must lean upon God. But God is generous. He doesn't show us the entire picture. He just shows us the next step or maybe the next couple steps. He gives us a goal that is within reach. I do like the analogy that I've like to show to children it was a cartoon I saw many years ago of an old man. He had a donkey and the donkey wouldn't move. And he tied a carrot on the end of a stick. And he got on the donkey's back and he put the carrot in front of the donkey's nose. And the donkey took a step thinking that he would get closer to the carrot. And obviously with each step the donkey took, the carrot was moved out further ahead of him. And it seems like a pretty good analogy to me of our spiritual life. God holds out this carrot to us and we take the step forward. But as soon as we get to where the carrot was, there's another carrot out further in front of us. So we must constantly strive, we must constantly reach. And I think the idea of perfection is that it is a continual striving. It is, I guess, like a disposition of our heart, of our mind, our will. We want to draw closer to God. We want to be nearer to him. And because God is infinite, we have this infinite capacity to advance in the spiritual life and to become more and more perfect. This person who questioned me about my statement that we must strive for perfection, I pointed out that Mary is perfect, but she grew in perfection. So she is perfect as a human being. She is perfect as a woman. She is perfect as a mother. She is a perfect virgin. She is this perfect spouse. She is perfection in all these things, but I have no doubt that she grew in these perfections. We even say that of Christ and his humanity, that he grew in grace and wisdom and age before God and men. And
if we're supposed to imitate him, that's we need to see that. Well, I do think as we go along in the series, all the virtues are going to show us that how we need to keep striving. And it's part of the reason why I really wanted to tackle the virtue aspect is because I think a lot of our problems in our spiritual life could be resolved if we all strive to practice virtue. It's not enough to just, well, I keep the commandments. It's like, well, I don't kill anybody. I go to mass on Sunday. Why would you think that that's good enough? That's what the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And so I just really want to make it, at least this year, my mission to help us all grow in virtue. I'm not saying that I'm virtuous by any means, but I will say studying the virtues has really done a world of good for me. And even taking the term perfection. So the definition of perfection from the dictionary is the condition, state, or quality of being free as possible from all flaws or deflects. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. And as someone who I think religious life really kind of helped pluck it out. I'm not saying it's completely remedied, but I tended to be a perfectionist. And which once you start diving into conforming to God's will, you realize that that's really pride. Yes. There's so many things I never bothered to try to do because if I wasn't going to do it right the first time, it didn't seem like it was worth the time. And also part of that might have been some of my upbringing and the idea of you don't want to waste someone else's time, don't want to waste someone else's money. We didn't have, the situation where we all took a bunch of music lessons, dance lessons, sports. It just wasn't something that we were a part of. But I do think if I would have had a hard time perhaps with a lot of it because I think I would have been very cognizant of the fact that this is money my parents worked hard for. I'm sure they would have, if I was slacking in any of that, not being a team player, not practicing, they would have made it known to me that you're wasting my money. Mm-hmm. So that mentality, I think, carries over into our spiritual life. And, too often we try to take on too much too, when we want to try to know and love and serve God and bite off more than we can chew. And then because we're not attaining that perfect, timeline, that list that we gave ourselves, it can unravel in our mind. We get anxious. And what happens when you get like that? You give up. You don't do anything. There's so many wasted opportunities. And what I've really enjoyed about the religious life, well, there's many things, and maybe we'll talk about that someday, but, and you have been a very good, for me in that is just give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? I mean, we've been working with sourdough, which is a thing for me, baking. And you just said, just try it. What's the worst that could happen?
We make chicken food.
Right. Or we eat it and offer it up. I mean, or when I learned how to sew, I had no sewing experience until I came here. And one of the first things I had to make was, I think, tunic or habit. I mean, we had to figure out a wimple. There were a whole bunch of things we needed to figure out. And I had no clue. And of course, in my mind, I was like, I need to get this right. I need to get this right away because I'm wasting your time. I'm wasting the lady that came to help us, wasting material. And as you go along, you know that, well, when you sew, you can rip stitches out. Not always, sew cleanly. Not every mistake is going to be rectified, but it's not the end of the world. And I had that horrible mentality. I'm sure it was stemmed to self-esteem issues, which we won't get into either, but pride, it is pride. It's hard to hear. It's like, well, you're just prideful, but it's hard to hear you're prideful when you're trying to be humble, when you're trying not to draw attention to yourself, when you're just trying to do things, do them well. And I guess you just realize that it's still prideful because it's what you want, or you even if you don't want other people to notice your accomplishments, you want to see them. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, how did I measure those accomplishments or those desires to what God wants or for his honor and glory? So I don't know if you have any comments on my little rambling there.
I couldn't help but think of Father Anthony's article, Freedom to Fail, that we must give our children the freedom to fail. Failure is not the end of the world. It is actually a starting point. It is a place where we come to a humble realization of who we really are, what we're really capable of. We give ourselves the opportunity to find where we can improve, how we can improve. And the spiritual life is not just a linear progression. We delineate the 3 stages of the spiritual life, but if you read the various commentators, you will see that we are constantly mixing the different stages. And it's not that we're going back and starting over every time, but very often we have to go back and into the penitential state and start not all over again, because we've already been through this. And hopefully we have learned from our mistakes. When we speak of spiritual progress, we're looking more interiorly than exteriorly. And too often we measure our success by what we have around us. We want some kind of physical, tangible thing that we can measure our progress against. I've improved, so I don't fall asleep when I say my rosary every night anymore. Or I don't fall asleep as often.
Yeah,
I'm not as distracted, but these even become subjective. And the danger is, I think, that we become scrupulous and we begin, now I have to do this over, I have to make it perfect. And we have to step back and say, only God is truly perfect. And to make our actions perfect, it is really simple. If I'm doing it for the love of God, it is perfect. It may not come out the way I want it or the world wants it, but with God, it is perfect because it was done with love. Around Mother's Day, I like to tell the story of the little boy who goes out and picks a bouquet of dandelions for his mother. He brings in a bouquet of dandelions. The mother tells him how beautiful they are. She puts them in a vase, and it is wonderful, and she is most grateful, and her heart is truly touched because this little boy went out and picked these dandelions for her. Now, if her husband went out and picked a bouquet of dandelions and brought them, they are nothing but weeds, because the husband is capable of more. And so more is expected of him. It's not the item itself. It's the same dandelions that are given to her. That's not what is important. It is the intention. It is what is in the heart. It is the will that is important. And so if we give everything to God with our whole heart and soul, even if it doesn't succeed in this world, it is a success for us spiritually or supernaturally. And very often God does, I don't say make us fail or lets us fail, to humble us, to make us strive harder, whatever it may be. And often I look at the failures, the difficulties, the struggles in this life, and I can't help but reflect upon Job. What did Job do that was wrong? He did nothing wrong, but yet he suffered all these calamitous events in his life that would crush just about anyone. But because he loved God, these events did not crush him, but they became the opportunity to love God even more. It became an opportunity to sacrifice his own will. I would like to have all these riches, all these things, but God has taken them away from me. So I want what God wants. And I will offer this as a sacrifice to him. And this is pleasing in the eyes of God. This is perfect in the eyes of God. And what God is looking for is different than what we're looking for. And so that idea of perfection being the sacrifice of our own will and conforming to the will of God. And of course, that gets us into a whole nother topic of what is the will of God? How do I know the will of God? Is God speaking to me? Is this an inspiration from God? Or is this an inspiration from the devils? Is this my own human fancy, folly? What is it? How do I discern that? And it becomes a whole matter of discernment, which might be another topic another time. But we are on perfection and really giving our will and doing it with our whole heart and soul, no matter what comes of it.
Well, this kind of brings me to another quote we have here. To be perfect in one's vocation is nothing else than to perform the duties and offices to which one is obliged, solely for the honor and love of God, referring all to his glory. Whoever works in this manner may be called perfect in his state, a man according to the heart and will of God. And this is St. Francis de Sales.
Okay.
So I thought that kind of fit into what you said there. But it really is our trials that improve us. I mean, we all know that logically. And the other thing that comes to my mind is that when we think, or read about trials, we're thinking of really big events, something that's super painful. But trials, in my mind, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking are things that, well, for example, many years ago, I had a hairstylist who began her own business, and she shared with me that, she's always continuing her education. She's also going in other places and get experiences to gain that experiences. And while it sounds like, what does it have to do with trials? But trials are also circumstances, events. And I think, that helped her improve her business. And I think that there's somewhat of a parallel to our spiritual life. Just as a doctor, graduates from medical school it's the experiences he has and sometimes the mistakes he makes that actually shape him to be a better doctor. And you probably could say that for yourself in your vocation as a priest. You had all the learning and studying, probably did very good marks, I'm certain of, but it wasn't until you were out there experiencing it. And I guess, those experiences are our trials?
They are our trials, but do we put our heart and soul into it? And guiding other people is a very, dangerous area to be in. And I think too many people take it too lightly. They're too indifferent about giving advice and suggestions to others. Because, as I like to point out to people, I don't know you. Yes, I've known you for many years, but I don't really know you. Only
what
you
you're
know
showing,
you.
and you only know what someone's showing you in that time.
Exactly. Parents need help guiding their children. I tell parents, I don't know your child. You know your child. You have been given the grace to know that child. One child may need a simple rebuke or a slight suggestion, whereas another child might need to receive some corporal punishment before you get their attention. But if you give a severe punishment to a very sensitive child, you're more likely to crush and do harm. But if you don't give a harsh enough punishment to a more difficult child who needs that harsher punishment, you are becoming a mockery. You become an enabler. because there are no consequences, or at least in the child's mind, there are no serious consequences. Some children, a serious consequence is my mother is upset with me. Others, a serious consequence is that I'm grounded, or
Right.
I've received
Sure.
some kind of corporal punishment, or that I have to do this or I have to do that. But it is God who has given the parents this grace. And a pastor coming in without really knowing your child, knowing the circumstances. And again, I don't really feel justified in passing a sentence on the child without hearing the child's side of the story. Because why did the child do this?
Yes.
What is important is, what was the child's intention? Did the child intend to do harm? Did the child intend to do wrong? Or was this an accident? Was it a mere oversight or a slip? Was the child perhaps not paying full attention? Maybe they should have been paying full attention, but it wasn't deliberate. And an accident should be treated completely different, at least in my mind, than from a deliberate malicious thought or a malicious intent. And so we really need to take a lot of things into consideration. And I'm not saying this to shirk my duties, but parents are in that position by God to know their child much better than I am.
Because I'm sure you can attest to that. If a parent asks you to sit and talk with my kid, that kid's not going to open up to you. Not right away. I mean, to actually have someone open up to you requires time. I mean, when I first came here, I was very, I guess, tightly wound, I guess. And I knew you were here to help me. You offered many times just to talk to you, but it took time for me to open up, partly because I've been hurt in the past by people before, or people that really didn't mean to help me. And I do find it interesting how we put a lot on kids. Like, you need to grow up, you need to be mature, you need to speak. And when we see adults having tantrums as well, and how many adults don't feel heard, but yet it's like, well, I'm giving my child all the opportunity in the world to be heard, to talk to whomever they want. But yet, if you were given the same opportunity, you probably clam up too, because in therapy, if you go see a therapist, you're going through many, many sessions before you actually get to the meat and potatoes of the issue here. It takes time to develop, and to expect you to really guide or set the child on the right path is unrealistic. I guess it could be something that you work with the parents together, but often it's more like you need to maybe advise the parents, perhaps, or reassure them. But too often was like, well, if I do this, will this work? We want the magic bullet.
Will this fix my kid?
Right.
And the answer is no.
No.
And well, what is the magic answer? There is no magic answer other than you asking God for the help and cooperating with the graces of God to guide this child.
Yes.
And of course, this child still has a free will. You can't strip this child of its own free will, but with the grace of God and your good intentions. And I think that is what is important, because parents make mistakes. But if the child can see that the parent made the mistake with a good will, with a good intention, with a good desire, their heart, they weren't there trying to destroy the child. And if the child can see that you had good intentions, that you intended good, even if evil came of it, or at least in the child's mind, evil came of it, they will be able to forgive, and that will not cause such a terrible effect upon the child. So just as I expect parents to try and look into what was the intention of the child when they did this or that, likewise, parents must pay attention to their own inward motivation. I blew up at my child and yelled at my child, sent them off. What was your intention when you blew up? What was in your heart? Was that just? Was that fair? These are the questions we must ask ourselves honestly. Am I here to help the child? Was this helpful in this situation? And I get into a lot of trouble when I tell parents, if you screw up with your child, you owe that child an apology. And many adults will tell me, no, parents should never apologize to the child. It is always the child who must apologize to the parent. I say if the parent was wrong, the parent needs to humbly say, I was wrong, admit it, ask forgiveness. And I think that will be most important.
I mean, how else do you expect your child to have empathy and compassion if you don't practice it yourself? And I know it's kind of hard to always judge that. I mean, sometimes the actions of your children outright surprise you. Like some stuff will happen out of nowhere. It's like, how could that be my child that did that? And I'm very interested in psychology, so I read a lot of different things. And sometimes the remedy is, all right, don't react right away. And I know sometimes like you need to, some things are like, I need to deal with this now, but sometimes it's taking a deep breath, making sure that, your emotions are in check before you deal with the acting out of your child, because oftentimes they're doing something because it's motivated by something else. Like there's an emotion there. Maybe they need some attention. They're acting out because they need something from you. And I realize that parenting is very draining, but it is worth it in the end. I mean, I can say for my own self is that I can look back on things that, if I wanted to, I could blame my parents for a whole mess of things. But as I got older, I realized that they were doing the best that they could with what they had. And I do believe that, there's hope for that with your children someday, that they will realize that. And I think when you have those moments of apologizing to your child, will help them see that as well, or even kind of letting them know what's going on. Maybe not always like the deep grown-up things you have to deal with, but if for some reason money is tight, be open with your kids about what's going on and what the strategy is and how they can help, instead of trying to hide it and then just outright change their life very
radically and abruptly.
Right. And we know that is something that's hard to react to because we wouldn't like it as adults. So, I mean, parenting is obviously something that it's all day, every day. But I mean, it's a wonderful vocation. So do you have any more comments?
No.
Okay. One of the things that has come up, and I've meant to bring this into our podcast at some point, I think perhaps maybe this might be the point of it. But the idea of how do you, because the idea, you don't want to, with pride, you don't want to puff them up and that they become full of themselves, but you also want them to have confidence and self-esteem. What are some suggestions on how to balance that? Like, especially, in the context of this, spiritually, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things in a worldly aspect you can find that would encourage that. But what kind of fits in there with how God, I mean, I guess, because I grew up with the idea, like, don't be overconfident, self-esteem was really not anything discussed, or it was poo-pooed, like that's too new agey, I guess. But we do need to be confident. And that is actually a virtue that's coming up later on in the series, I think October. But anyway, what would be some recommendations?
When I talk to seminarians they've studied all the theology, they know it, they've passed their tests, there is a sense of accomplishment. We've done this. I know the subject, at least I know the subject well enough to continue on. But one of my recommendations and talks that I give, especially to seminarians, is when you're a priest, there are going to be times when you're going to be caught off guard or you don't really know the answer. I said, be humble enough to admit, I don't know the answer right now. I will be happy to look into this. I'm sorry. I should know this, but it's not on the tip of my tongue. Give me some time to look it up. And too often I've come across priests who will make something up at the spur of the moment. Whatever pops into their head at the moment, and then of course you have to go back and take that back, which is very humbling, very difficult, and it reduces your own credibility. I have more respect for a person who says, I don't know, than for somebody who's going to give me a bunch of BS. I can't stand the BS, especially when I find out that That's all it was. In my book, once you've done that, I can't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
I never know what to believe you, what you're saying. And I find that is all over the internet. These people write these expert opinions, these expert explanations of things. And if I catch them in just one thing that I know is BS, I'm ready to throw the whole thing out.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to go back and give you any credit again. It's not to say that I won't go back and review and think. I'll examine it again from a different perspective, but already I've got a guard up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think really in raising children is very much the same. They have to see this in practice. Your children will come up with questions you don't know the answer, and because I said so, sometimes that's all that's necessary, but other times you have to say, I really don't know. I'll have to get a dictionary and figure out.
Yep.
We can look into this later. I don't have the time right now, but let me get back to you if you're really interested. And I know with children, many times they've already forgotten it.
Sure.
They don't even know what they're asking. So it's not such a big deal, but to have that integrity with your children is important. And that will teach your children that mom and dad they have this integrity with me, this honesty. It is a virtue for them to emulate. I need to be accountable. I need to be honest. I need to be forthright because this is the way to be. And sometimes it's easier to say a little white lie or to fudge the truth a little bit. But if I see that nobody else around me, my parents don't do this, this is not something that is praiseworthy. I'm not going to say your children won't make those little white lies. They will, but hopefully they will have a bit of time to reflect, and their conscience will say that wasn't quite true.
Because white lies are still lies.
And I'm not saying they will come back to apologize or to say I was incorrect or I don't know why I, made this up. I guess I was afraid or whatever. They may not get to that point with their parents, but their parents should emulate that idea all the time, or as frequently as they possibly can. For the mother to say, I was stressed, I was under, I blew up at you, I should not have handled the situation that way. That was not very mature. That isn't the right way. That's not really what I want. That's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And I'm sorry. That gives the child an opportunity to say, I can forgive you. Now will you forgive me? Because really, I pushed all your buttons and I saw you weren't having a good day and I was just having fun and I didn't realize that it would hurt you that much.
What do you think of the idea, especially if a parent feels apology is necessary, by also ending it with to ask their child, please pray for me? I'm sure, and I'm sure it is in a lot of children's repertoire, their night prayers to pray for mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles. But like in that moment, please pray for me. Pray for me that I'll do God's will. Pray for me to be a better mother, father to you. I mean, or even like right then and there, let's say a Hail Mary together so that I will strive to do God's will and you'll strive to do God's will. I mean,
and God will make us both better.
Exactly. So is it wrong to use the phrase to your child, I'm proud of you?
No, I think it's necessary.
Right. But see, the thing is, so many people have, put that in, it's like, well, you don't want them to become proud and full of themselves. If you say, I'm proud of you, they're going to be prideful little brats.
Well, it has to be balanced.
Sure.
There has to be that humility there, but we all need encouragement.
Right.
We need to know when we've done something well, when we've checked off this goal of ours or this standard. I often jokingly tell of the children that I had when we operated a grade school here, and the children would come with their paper and say, is this good enough? And to me, it's never good enough. If our attitude is only to do good enough, we haven't done our best. We haven't given it our all. But to expect the children to give everything in every paper, every worksheet is, I think, pushing the limit. There is a point when it's good enough. because we don't want to create this burden. I remember when I went to college for the first time, and I've got all these different courses, and every course seems to be piling all this work upon me. And I think, well, this professor doesn't realize that this is not the only course I'm taking here. My day is filled with all these courses, and I don't have the time to really do all the work that all these professors are assigning to me and to get it done in the allotted time. And I think too often we're pushed to that limit, and we have to be able to step back and say, okay, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to give it my best, and then it's good enough for me. I'm satisfied that I've done the best I could in the allotted time with the circumstances that I have. I have truly tried my best, and that is good enough, because I'm doing it for God. And I really like that in Father Anthony's article there, in the Seraph he wrote, that God gives us our talents, and our gift to God is how we use those talents, how we've employed them. And so the outcome, the physical outcome, the material outcome is not really important. What is truly important is the spirit or the will in which we've done these things. And so even if materially everything is a failure, we lose everything, that's okay, as long as we were doing it for the love of God. And everything in this life has risk, and we don't really know whether God is going to bless this or destroy this. If we're building up ourselves, we can look for it to be destroyed, for it to turn to nothing. But when we do it for the love of God, we expect that there will be an eternal reward for it. And not only that eternal reward, but God has promised 100-fold in this life. He will make good come of our actions when we do them for the love of him. And I think that is where we get to perfection.
So I have a weird question, because it just popped in my head. I never thought about it like this before, and it might sound silly, but is God, or could God be proud of us?
He can be pleased with us,
Right.
but pride is a hard attribute to give to
well, that's
God.
what I mean. Even when we ourselves say, "I'm proud of you," it's just, for some people, I was like, "Whoa," Yeah. But so
God is pleased. Yeah. And he rewards, but often we think the reward is only a material thing, a positive material thing. And sometimes God's reward is taking things away from us. And the greatest gift is to have these things taken away from us. The greatest gift is often to be allowed to fail. And it hurts. It's humbling, but at the same time, it is exactly what we need.
There's so many lessons involved.
Yes.
Do you think it's better to actually use a term with your child, or, well, anyone, "I'm pleased with you," or
Probably, yes.
Probably. And we know there's a balance, virtue's in the middle. But I think sometimes we get too carried away as like, well, if I, again, use the word proud too much, my kid's going to be an entitled brat. Or maybe you don't think of that of your children, but you're worried what other people are going to think of your children, which is usually more of the case. Is we're for a lot of parents, it's how's my child look to other people, and in our culture today with social media and all these things and so many platforms, it's just we don't see reality there. So
I think parents put an undue burden on their children, because the children must now, I must make mommy proud. I must make my daddy proud. I have to live up to this bumper sticker that my mom put on the back of the car, that I'm this
proud mother of a honor student.
I'm this honor student. Now I've got this standard to live up to.
Right.
And that's a lot of pressure.
Right.
And I think really we should be pleased with our children as long as we're seeing them put forth the effort.
Encouraging.
Whether they, as I think Father Anthony pointed out, whether they're a solo concert pianist or a violinist or whatever, first violinist in the choir, whatever it may be, the star ball player on the ball team, that's not what's necessary. It's necessary that they learn to cooperate with the other team members, to work together, to play together, but most importantly, that they do this of God.
Not everybody can be the star player or play first chair in the orchestra or be the star ballerina. It's really learning how to be that team player, like, because most often than not, we're going to be part of a team rather than singled out. So, or else you really don't want to be. I mean, I think a lot of people who have that star factor in their lives would probably, if you got a chance to really talk to them one-on-one on the level, they probably would admit that it's a burden rather than,
and it costs them a lot to get to this position.
So the idea today where a lot of families, they're trying to be famous.
Well, as I point out in many of my sermons, that, we always try to compete with one another. And God did not make us to compete with one another. He made us to complement one another. We need to work together. And I think even in the team sports, competition is emphasized much more than the cooperation. The team player idea seems to be vanished under the pressure that we've got to beat the opposing team. The competition is ingrained in our nature, so that now we have, with the feminist movement, we've got male against female, we've got the boss against the employee. It is endless, the rich against the poor. And then, of course, this transgender movement throws all this in there, the constant, against the cis against the trans, and the trans against the cis, and it's nonsense.
Well, and I think I saw something a few months ago on Facebook. I think it might have been one of your relatives posting, talking about children's sports and how it's really gotten carried away, that it's not even, it's all about winning instead of actually having, the chance to just play as a team, fail as a team. It's all about winning. And then it's just not as exciting. It's not as fun. I wish I would have thought of that and looked back on it, but I thought that was a neat observation from one of the mothers about that. It's just, and people are seeing it. There's a lot of people that agree with it, and yet what do you do to change it? Because just kind of like the idea, you be the change you want to be, but when you feel like you're doing it alone, and it's like, do you just pull your kids out of it, or you try to? And it's hard when there is like that favored player or few favored players, and you're always put on the bench because we need this X number of people on the team, but you're not worth enough to play because we need to win. But how is that player going to learn anything if he doesn't get to play? And it's just a very interesting time waste. But anyway,
but really I think their parents can step in. You can keep your child on the team unless the child is completely devastated by being on the bench. But, the practices are there. They have their time. And if they're putting forth their effort, that's all we really want. That's all God wants of us. And we should be content with that. And we should teach our children to find contentment in that. I'm happy to see the team win. I'm happy to do my part in practice, or, the training. I help train these others, the top team players, whatever they are better because I was there to practice. We jokingly talk about you're the half that makes the top half possible. See, that's not really a small thing. That's important. The doctors talk about the percentiles with their children, and I often think, well, somebody's got to be below the average in order to make the average. The average doesn't exist.
The whole comparison on a child's development just gets me very agitated because especially when families will compare like the size of the newborn baby, and like, oh, my 6-month-old can still wear 3-month clothing. So my child's clearly better, but my oldest nephew, he was late, and he was a chubby, gloriously chubby baby. He's not anymore. He's 18, skinny and tall. But I just remember people commenting on his size, and as if it was a bad thing. But I was like, but he's thriving. And it's not to say those who are smaller aren't thriving, although that is a terminology they use. They use failure to thrive. I was like, why do we have to put these terms out there? Why do we have to make the mothers who are doing the best they can think that, well, I must be doing something wrong because my child is not up there, when maybe you are. You probably are. I shouldn't say maybe, or you probably are. If you're feeding your child, if you have a roof over his head, keeping him warm, you're comforting them in their trials and troubles, you are being a good parent.
It reminds me of the generally older men complaining about the crying children at church, the misbehaving children at Mass. And why doesn't Bishop Giles call them out on this? Why doesn't he do something about this? And my response principally is, I don't think these mothers and fathers are deliberately want everyone's attention.
Definitely not.
They're not there to make their child cry. They don't want their child to make this scene in church. And I do believe that these parents are conscientious and are doing the best that they can.
Absolutely.
If they're taking the child out while the child is crying, that's great. And sometimes they don't take the child out. Well, maybe they think they can calm the child there. Maybe this is their approach to parenting, and we don't know the whole circumstance. But I like to believe that parents are trying. And I don't believe any parent really wants to be the center of attention because their child is the one that's screaming.
Right.
But sometimes the screaming child just needs to scream.
Right.
And I think we need to give people the benefit of the doubt more often than we actually do. And I think too often we're ready to find fault. And of course, the old men tell me, "Oh, when I was their age, our parents would never have done this, or we wouldn't have been here." I'm thinking this is a whole different world. I told one man, he said, "Well, my mother would go to one Mass and my father would go to another Mass, and then the children who were too little couldn't behave. They just stayed home. They didn't have to go to Mass." I said, "Well, that was nice."
Because I don't think so. But
that was nice because you had all these Masses and opportunities. More often than not, you get a chance at one Mass, and if you don't get there, that's it.
But I can't help to think that, in those glory days before Vatican II, or even just slightly after, when things were, parish in the neighborhood and you had multiple Masses, I don't know. I feel like the idea of that you could leave the little ones at home, I think that blew up in our face, to be honest with you.
I think the children can learn that.
Experience.
When they see the emotions, the sentiments of the parents, if mom and dad come to Mass with a sense of this is sacred, this is something holy, there is some kind of mystery here. And the children pick up on that very quickly, and they begin to reflect exactly what they see in their parents. Now, if the parents come to Mass and they're bored and looking out the window and wondering what's going on, watching other people's children, what are the children learning?
Right.
There's nothing sacred here. There's nothing serious. This is just another house, another place where I can play or whatever, where the adults are all communicating, talking, and there's nothing for me to do but sit here and kick the pew.
Well, and that makes me think of a conversation I had with some of the mothers down in Kentucky, is how you phrase things like, we get to go to Mass. Not that we have to, we get to. And that is a very important distinction, because if you choose like, well, we have to go to Mass, kids, so get ready, we have to go. Already you're setting yourself up for kind of like, well, a disinterest, and kind of it's begrudgingly you're going. I mean, if you say we have to go because God commands us, so we have to. If you feel like it's a burden, you're saying it's a burden. Maybe you don't think it sounds that way, but your kids pick up on that. Your kids pick up on your attitude. But if you're like, we get to go to church today, we'll get to receive Jesus if we're old enough to go to communion. Is your heart and soul in it or not? Right. Are you doing it with all your will? Do you want to do God's will? It is God's will that we come to Mass. Am I coming there of my own free will? Am I coming there joyfully to do God's will? The children are picking up on all of this. Yep. And of course, one man told me, he says, "Oh, when I was that age, my parents would not have permitted me to scream like that. I feared for my life." And I says, "You don't remember when you were 2 years old." And I'm morally certain that 2 years and younger, you don't remember. No. And I'm pretty sure you misbehaved.
And yes, you probably were punished, but not as severely as you're making it out to
Right.
be. As I mentioned in my sermon last week, old men tend to exaggerate. They're proud of the crosses and the difficulties and all the obstacles that they overcame, so much so that they even exaggerate and make up things that didn't really happen, just so they can brag about how tough they had it and how they survived and they pulled through. And very little credit is given to God. Very seldom do you hear, by the grace of God, I overcame this or survived that.
Well, and just as we all thrive on the energy, and especially want positive energy, the kids can pick up. If you're excited about going to church because you're going to see Jesus, you get, he's there in the tabernacle. If you truly feel that, your kids will pick up on that. And I also like how you do try to encourage families to go visit our Lord outside of Sunday. And I know that is a burden for a lot of people. They do have to travel a little bit, but we would do it for a worldly thing. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking every week, maybe once a month to say, you know what, on Friday, we're going to go and visit our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. Because for most places, here in Rochester, the chapel's open every day, all day. And wherever else you go, if you are in Lubbock, Texas, Father's very clear of his schedule when he's in town. I'm sure if you wanted to come visit, you simply call him. Same with Father Anthony in Wabuca, Wisconsin. Yeah. Down in Kentucky, there's a brother down there. I'm pretty sure the chapel's open all the time there. If you want to go, it can happen. And
it doesn't have to be a long stay. No. I think really some of the most beautiful and touching stories are, the mother going to pray before the statue of the Blessed Mother, and for her to pray out loud so the little child can hear, mm-hmm. to light a candle, mm-hmm. and then show genuflect, and we can leave the chapel.
See, sometimes we want a bigger payout for what we put in, because I do realize you making a 20, 30-minute drive for a 5-10 minute visit just seems like, well, that seems like a waste of time, because of course we want to see the return, but God does appreciate you making that effort. He's not going to outright,
And I think the shorter the visit, the more devout you can be, and the more likely that child is going to remember it. Mm-hmm. This was an intense moment. Mm-hmm. There was something mysterious. There's something beautiful here. And because Mom believes, Mom prayed, and I heard Mom's prayer, which she prayed to God. It's not just an Our Father or Hail Mary, but, talking to God. And now God is a real person. We really went to his house, mm-hmm. and God is someone I can really talk to. Yep. And he hears my prayer, and I have to pray like my mom did. Exactly. And I want to recreate that in my own life. And I think when it becomes something interesting, then he will say, Mom, can we go? Mm-hmm. Can we go to church? I would like to light a candle for this intention.
Kids do get excited about
or
candles.
That intention. Mm-hmm. Can we go and pray for an aunt or uncle or somebody who is sick, or my friend? Can we go and say a prayer to Mary and ask God's blessing, ask Mary to pray for him, light a candle? Can we do this? And it is something exciting. But again, I think there's something of the mysterious, of the solemnity that is there. And of course, when you leave the church, you can get in the car and you can have a good time and you can whatever. Mm-hmm. But when we come into the church door, there's like a switch has been flipped, and now it is serious. And when they can see this happens, not just on Sunday when we come to Mass, but it happens every time we go to church. Even when nobody else is there, it's just God and the angels and me. I need to be able to flip that switch and go and kneel in front of the Blessed Sacrament, the altar of the Blessed Mother, and to pour my heart out to God and to thank him and really open up my heart to God. Too often we focus our prayers are only memorizing the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be, the Apostles' Creed, my act of contrition, my act of faith and hope and charity. Okay, I've got all my prayers, and you say, can you pray? Let's see, which one of those do you want me to say? Well, I want you to pray from your heart. Mm-hmm. These prayers are good. You can make them your own. They are very beneficial. But just to come and say, to humbly kneel down before Our Lady at her side altar and say, Holy Mother of God, can you help me? The finances are rough, or we're having troubles here in this situation. Please pray to God for me.
Well, and I do think when we see, because there are a lot of prescribed prayers and they have indulgences attached, and we sometimes think, those are the better ones because we'll get this indulgence. And I'm not saying don't say those, but there's something about that in the moment, that organic term, phrases of love, affirmations. I mean, that's what we want. We want we don't want to be scripted all the time. I mean, we're not scripted here. You and I are having a conversation. Imagine if I, wrote out what I want you to say to me each day. I mean, and you wrote out exactly how I'm supposed to converse with you. Who would want that? Yeah. You should pray as if you're talking to God, talking to Jesus, talking to the Blessed Mother. I do like those little bitty prayers. Because I also think when we look at things that have an indulgence, that it, if we goof it up, then we've lost it all, and we treat it kind of superstitiously. So
you mentioned like a 20-minute journey to get to church to say 5 minutes of prayer or whatever, but actually those 20 minutes to church actually become a prayer, because that is my intention. Even though you can be talking about other things in there, your intention is to get to the church to make this prayer. So actually that entire journey to and from becomes a prayer. And it doesn't have to be a formal prayer, because God sees the heart. He knows this is your intention, this is your desire, and he accepts that desire for the deed. And this is perfect love.
Right. And it may take a few attempts to really get your children excited about it. Don't try it once. Like, well, the kids just are kind of indifferent to it, so it didn't seem worth it. You got to keep trying, and just make it part of your schedule, part of something you do every month, and it will be a joy. It absolutely, and I think sometimes we just get too scared or to try something different, but we need to stretch ourselves too.
Well, look, parents strap their children in these car seats to go for a ride. What child likes to be strapped in the car seat?
Right.
But you do it anyway. And eventually the child grows accustomed. They can climb in a chair and strap themselves in.
And they're very proud of themselves.
Now we can go. And how did that happen?
Experience.
Because you persevered. And yes, it was the law that made you do it. And you probably wouldn't have done it if it wasn't the law. But now you've reached a plateau where now the child can do this himself, and the child is proud of having done this themselves, and now they don't dread the ride in the car. And
obviously you would build on your visits too. Not saying you have to make more visits, but make those visits maybe a little bit longer, or depending on how many children you have, how old they are, they can each decide, like, well, what prayer do you want to say? And then what prayer will you make it involving them. If you're just say, well, we're going to go here and we're going to say 1 Our Father, 3, a Hail Mary and a Glory Be, and then we'll leave. It's just kind of, you might have to be that direct in the beginning to, give them the example, but, be excited about it. Be excited for the opportunity.
Why are we going to say this, Our Father and Hail Mary and Glory Be? I think the children need to know. We're going to go and ask the Blessed Mother, and I think you should vocalize this so the children can hear, so Mary can hear.
Right.
We're going to say an Our Father, Hail Mary, and Glory Be for Aunt Betty or Uncle Joe.
Let the kids choose an intention too.
And now let us go there, and we're going to, Mother of God, we're going to say these prayers, and we ask you to send graces for this intention. Please help us. Then the Our Father, Hail Mary, and Glory Be can follow. You can light the candle, learn to genuflect and to properly cover the girls' heads if they're there.
Folding your hands.
How to fold their hands.
How to
walk through the church. How to make the sign of the cross. How to let them dip their hand in the holy water font. Every child loves that.
Right.
If they're given the opportunity.
Right. And Sunday morning, as we know, is just really, we know that that's not the best time to do it, because a lot of people are there, depending on where you are, it's an earlier morning mass, and it's just trying to get everybody together and get there. But to take a different day of the week does just take that pressure off. And I do think those, the examples always make a difference. For me, I was more excited by Rosary said when we each took a turn at different mysteries to give our own personal intention. Like if it was our turn to announce the mystery, we'd also then vocalize who our specific intention would be. So it did make it more special, I guess. So that's just an idea if you want to throw out there. So anyway, very interesting discussion, don't you think?
I do. I have no idea how long we've been talking.
I didn't quite keep track. It might be about an hour. So any final words? Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Aim higher.
Aim higher. There we go. And don't think of perfection as if in the material aspect that everything has to be in its right place. Everything has to be exact according to this highest standard. What we're looking for in the spiritual life is a perfect act of the will, this perfect love that I'm doing this for God. I'm doing this with God. And yes, there's going to be times when I don't want to do it, but that's when I sacrifice my will. And I say, yes, this is not what I want, but it's what God wants. And therefore, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it with a smile on my face, with joy in my heart, because I'm going to do this with God and for God. And that is the perfection we're striving for. This good intention, a right intention, a willingness, a loving heart that's ready to say, not my will, but thine be done.
And with that, I think a Deo Gratias is in order.
Okay, Deo Gratias.
Oh, thank you, Your Excellency.